President Biden is facing growing calls from within his own party to encourage Israel to bring an end to the violence in the Middle East. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has the latest.
The White House tonight is under increasing pressure to speak out more forcefully against the Israeli strikes, with the number of dead and wounded Palestinians far outpacing the number of Israeli victims. Thousands rallied in support of the Palestinians in multiple cities across the U.S. this weekend, and nearly 30 Democratic senators, including Connecticut's Chris Murphy, released a statement Sunday calling for an immediate ceasefire.
There isn't really a path to peace without the United States playing a role, and so I hope that the Biden team is going to be very active over the next few days to try to wind down these hostilities.
One-time Biden rival Bernie Sanders also said the U.S. should stop supporting Netanyahu, while New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez questions if U.S. aid has contributed to violence inflicted on Palestinians. When members of his own party share the belief that he is giving too much credence to Israel in this situation, are they wrong?
Our role as the White House, as the federal government, is to play a constructive role in diplomacy, to have intensive, quiet discussions with leaders in the region.
But that sort of approach with Netanyahu may not work, as he signaled no plans to change tactics against Hamas on Sunday.
We're not going to just let them get away with it. Neither would you.
Palestinian diplomat Man Rashid Arikat says President Biden has to do more.
I think the United States and the international community need to work more diligently to rein in Israel and tell them enough is enough.
Ed O'Keefe joins me now from the White House. So, Ed, as you mentioned, President Biden said he spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Monday. What else is the White House saying about their call?
Well, this was the second one they've had since Saturday, and it's, essentially a part of an ongoing push by the administration to talk to not only the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also other leaders across the Middle East. The White House statement points out that Egypt is also helping to try to broker some kind of a ceasefire. What's most interesting, though, is that in this latest statement from the White House, as we say here, reading out the call, it mentions again that the president reiterated that Israel has a right to defend itself, but buried further down in the write-up is the fact that he is now calling for a ceasefire. And that's notable because most of today, Democrats across his party were calling on him to actually do that and to make that a bigger part of his outreach to Israeli and Palestinian leaders. It says, among other things, he encouraged Israel to make every effort to ensure the protection of innocent civilians, and that the two leaders discussed progress in Israel's military operations against Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza. In essence, it seems that the president's trying to keep the Israeli leader close to him and engaged with him as they try to figure out exactly how this ends. But clearly, the White House now being dragged into something it doesn't necessarily want to engage on as it tries to steer U.S. foreign policy away from these long simmering, hard to solve conflicts like that in the Middle East, and more to ones that they believe are far more impactful on the U.S. future, and that, of course, would be things like countering the rise of China.
You mentioned, Ed, that pressure. A growing number of lawmakers was calling for a ceasefire, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez. Just how much pressure was the Biden administration facing from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and how much pressure does the administration continue to face on Capitol Hill?
They're going to continue to face it based on this description of what happened today, because he's not calling for a full-throated ceasefire and not, apparently, at least in their public statements, criticizing or calling out the Israelis for how many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Of course, the Israeli argument is, look, Hamas embeds itself into these communities, these tightly packed urban areas, and so civilian casualties are inevitable the way that they set up themselves there. But the administration, hearing it from Democrats on all ends, which I think is what's most notable. You mentioned, for example, Chuck Schumer and Bob Menendez, two more moderate. Menendez certainly hawkish or a little more mainstream when it comes to foreign policy thinking. Then, of course, on the far left flank, you've got Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and other far-left Democrats suggesting that U.S. foreign aid and the general U.S. attitude towards Israel is incorrect and needs to be course-corrected. So, this has the potential, depending on how things go in the region in the next few days, to become more of a domestic political headache as well. And once again shows that on this issue, where Democrats used to be in pretty decent lockstep, there are growing divisions, a lot of it driven by ideology and generation.
On another topic, Ed, President Biden also discussed the COVID-19 pandemic Monday and announced the U.S. will be sending an additional 20 million doses of approved vaccines overseas. What else did the president have to say on that?
That's right. So now a total of 80 million vaccines being donated to the world by the United States. 20 million from the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson supply. Another 60 million coming from AstraZeneca once that is approved by the FDA, as it should be in the coming weeks. The argument the White House makes is that now the United States will have donated 5 times more than any other country to the rest of the world in terms of vaccine supply, calling out Russia and China, who've been doing it and been doing it much more quickly and publicly than the United States. But the president notably, and again, this speaks to priorities about foreign policy and where the focus is at this White House at least, talked about how coming out of this pandemic is emblematic of the sort of democracies versus autocracies conflict that he sees happening around the world. And he argued that it will be democracies that lead the world out of the pandemic and that the United States will lead those democracies by being able to do what it's done here, vaccinate a majority of its country and then have enough left over to donate tens of millions and ultimately probably much more to the developing world that's going to need it. Where exactly these doses are going, that remains to be seen. The White House says we'll learn more about that in the coming days. Remember, 4 million doses of AstraZeneca have already been donated to Mexico and Canada. Some is also going to India. There's been medical relief sent to Brazil amid the big uptick they had there. Don't be surprised if some of the donations go to Central America and maybe even more to Mexico ahead of Vice President Harris's trip there early next month.
Looking ahead, Ed, Tuesday is the deadline the White House set for Republicans to deliver their counterproposal to the president's infrastructure plan. Where do talks between the White House and Congress currently stand?
Well, nobody said they're over or that they're done with, and that, I suppose, is all that you really need in terms of progress, the sign that they're still talking. We expect to learn more from the White House and from the Republicans who came over for that meeting this week about where they sit now on proposed changes to the proposals that have been made. Remember, the president's looking for about $4 trillion in spending. The Republicans countered with about $568 billion in just traditional infrastructure spending. Somewhere in the middle might they meet. We'll see. Tomorrow is one deadline, but really the end of next week as we head into the Memorial Day break is probably a bigger deadline. And as White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said today, that's about 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a lifetime in American politics. Hope still springs eternal here that some kind of an agreement will be in the works by then. But don't expect anything to be passed for at least another month or two.
All right, Ed O'Keefe. Thanks so much, Ed.
Take care.